Today is Monday, June 16th, 2025, and this is Spring Office Hours, Season 4, Episode 16, Spring gRPC. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how's it going?
It's a great time to be a Spring developer. I love my job. I love this. This is my favorite time of the week, and I'm just glad to be here. Today's going to be special, really special.
Yeah. Happy Father's Day to you, belated. I know I sent you a text yesterday, and happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Hope you all had a good weekend full of whatever makes you happy. For me, that was definitely a cookout and hanging out with the girls. So it was definitely a great weekend. What have you been up to?
Well, it is my birthday today.
What?
So yeah,
I did not know that. I feel like a bad friend.
It's a special day. I don't really advertise my birthday because there's been so many of them. But Simon was the first one to tell me happy birthday, and again he's here. So yeah, it's a wonderful day.
Well, a special happy birthday to you, my friend.
Thank you.
I mean, what else? What better things to do on your birthday than have a Spring Office Hours?
Break open this awesome new technology. We got a new project, and now it's fully GA, I believe. At least it's not experimental. I think it's still GA.
Yeah,
We're going to find out here in a minute. And things are just moving in the right direction. So there's a very particular use case that I'm kind of excited to talk about today. So yeah, this is going to be a good one.
Awesome. So just to remind folks, we do this as a live stream, usually every Monday from 1 to 2 Eastern. Today we're a little earlier, but that's okay. It's still on a Monday. If you go ahead and if you're not here in the live stream, if you missed the live stream, you can catch the replay on the Spring Developer YouTube channel. And as always, we go ahead and turn this into a podcast. So if you want to take us on the run, in the car, wherever you enjoy listening to us, you can take us, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts.
And when you come to my house for dinner, if you leave hungry, that's your fault. If you're here, you're in the live chat and you've got questions. If you don't ask those questions, that's your fault. We've got a great community. Always got great guests. Get your questions asked.
All right. I see some questions coming in already. So we'll go ahead and get those started. And hopefully our guests can help us answer some of those questions today. I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest and the one and only, the great Dr. Dave Syer. Dave, how's it going?
Great, thanks. Happy birthday to Sean.
Thank you.
So Dave, for the 1 or 2 people out there who may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on these days?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Dave. Here I am in London, which is the explanation for why we're running a bit early this week, because anyway, yeah, different time zones and everything. Yeah, if you don't know me, you probably have seen my name if you ever read source code, because I'm on the top of some of those comments in a few projects that I've worked on.
Just a few.
Yeah, and then my first one was Spring Batch, or way back in the day. That was when I joined, like 2006 or something. So 2006, yeah, it really was nearly 20 years.
Wow.
So there you go. And of course, we haven't always been Broadcom, but we've always been the same team, really.
Yep.
And yeah, there's a few of us left from those days. I'm not the only one.
We're lucky to have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of remarkable in some ways, isn't it? There's people like me and Jürgen are still attached to the project. There aren't many long core teams in the business like that, I don't think. Yeah. Anyway, so that's me. Yeah, and well, my job title is I'm head of open source Spring, so I'm kind of the chief technology officer or something. I make sure that I keep up to date with what everybody's doing, and kind of shape the resource allocations a little bit in some way, whatever I can. And I tinker, right? I'm not just an inveterate tinkerer.
And that's one of the things that we like.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Hey.
it's a great job, right? I mean, like you just said, this is your favorite job. I think this is mine. I get to basically play around with whatever I want, and if it turns out to be useful, if I throw it on the wall and the spaghetti sticks, then everybody's happy. And so that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about one of the spaghettis that's stuck. gRPC, and so that's been a bit of a hobby horse of mine for some time, but we have finally made some progress on it.
Yeah, and I think before we get into the project itself, maybe we could talk about gRPC at a high level.
The technology,
yeah, what is it? Like, what is it, and why should we care about it? Like, what are we using it for?
I don't know. I mean, the easiest way to understand what it is, I suppose, it might be from a sort of technical definition standpoint. It's a protocol. It's a written down standard protocol. It says you use HTTP2, you use HTTP post to send and receive data, and the serialization, deserialization is with protobufs, and protobufs is another well-known technology with a spec, and it's a binary encoding of pretty much any data you want. So it's RPC, remote procedure calls, and the G is for Google, and you have to do little g, big R, big P, big C. Otherwise you get yelled at.
Don't mess it up.
Well, branding is important. I mean, it's not our brand, but that's what it is. So it's kind of a standard, if you like. It's a well-defined protocol that has it has quite a big ecosystem. I think that's kind of what makes it attractive for a lot of people, especially the polyglot angle. So this basically, it's RPC. You define a language independent interface. There's an interface definition language, a bit like the old, Corba and things that we've run away screaming from in the past. So you write something which is language independent, and then this is part of the protobuf tool chain. There's a protobuf tool chain with a compiler, proto-C, which is produced by Google, and they also produce a load of plugins, and they make it very easy to write your own plugins to convert those language independent files, definition files, into the language of your choice. And so there's really good support for pretty much any language that you would want to use. And I think that is probably one of the key reasons that people use gRPC a lot, is because they want to publish an API or consume an API, and they want to be a language agnostic. They want the clients of their API to be written in whatever language they choose. And with
those protobufs, we get some kind of type safety with that as well, right?
Protobufs are interesting, yeah. So it's type safe, and it's also because they have this thing where they number the fields, and so you can always append, but you can't delete. So it's kind of a little bit of protection against API evolution. So if you want to evolve an API, you can add a field, and that's a well-defined process in protobufs. You can't mess it up and change a field. You have to add a new one if you want to change the API. So that kind of makes everything clear for the clients and the servers. And so to some extent, at least anyway, it'll tolerate some mismatch between clients and servers. I think that's probably another key reason why people use it a lot. So we've got polyglot, we've got API evolution. A third reason might be just the binary. Because it's very efficient. The binary serialization is very efficient. So if you care about how many bytes you use, then that's going to be important.
And it seems almost counterintuitive that the more as technology evolves, we're getting gigabit in the house, that maybe you don't need to worry about bytes, but also we're now expecting to do more transactions per second, so the size matters.
And everybody's counting the cost, right?
Yep.
networks are not completely free.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Especially and you can see that they're not free when you're being charged by the byte for them by Amazon or Google. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, one
use case that was a big topic. It was like,
one thing I was kind of doing some research on this because we were talking before the show, and I've looked into this in the past, but never like had a chance to kind of use it in something. It said gRPC treats remote calls more like function calls. So are you defining these protos and it's almost just like a local function call that you're calling then?
Yeah, I mean, they have unary and streaming baked into the protocol. You can choose when you define the function whether it's just an exchange of one request for a response, or if the response is going to be streaming, or even the request can also be streaming. So you can have bidirectional streaming. That gives you a little bit of flexibility, which is kind of nice, I guess.
Cool.
Another reason why you might use it instead of a sort of standard HTTP exchange, I guess, is because those are, I mean, you can always do streaming with those as well, but the servers might not be well optimized for that.
Right. Yeah. So that was kind of my big question, or actually thing I wanted to get across when we got into gRPC today is like, we're all kind of building APIs using REST and maybe GraphQL, like things that we've kind of become standard to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the big question is like, well, why? My question is always like, when somebody starts talking about some technology, I'm like, I have too many things on my plate. I'm not just going to learn something because these guys came on a show and told me to learn it. So kind of the why for this, I think we've mentioned a couple of them, but performance. You can get significantly faster performance from REST APIs because of that binary serialization. You get some type safety, you get streaming, and as you said, language agnostic. So this screams to me like, if I'm in an organization that has a bunch of microservices and we're calling service-to-service communication, some of these are written in Spring, some of these are written in .NET, right?
Especially in an organization where there are multiple platforms and multiple languages that are, embedded, and nobody's going to get rid of them. And that's where we see it a lot. Like Netflix, for instance, are big gRPC users.
Awesome.
And Spring users, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Our buddy Paul's on the speaking circuit, going around telling everybody how great Netflix is, and they do a lot with Spring and, like you said, gRPC and GraphQL. So that's really cool to see. So the Spring the Spring gRPC project, we're currently at 0.8.0.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of take us back and how did this project start? Like, why did you get started on this?
Well, like I said, it's been a bit of a hobby horse of mine for years. I've kind of wanted to do it. There are some community projects that do Spring Boot auto configuration for gRPC.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Java library that is maintained by Google, and all the important stuff that you can create a server, create a client, the basic plugins to get the IDL compiled to Java live in there as well. And all that was missing really for Spring users was a little bit of sugar, like Spring Boot stuff that that we're now quite familiar with: dependency management, configuration properties, auto configuration, so doing stuff kind of transparently. So there were like 2 or 3 projects in the community doing that, and every time I raised my hand and said, excuse me, a lot of people are using gRPC. We have this State of Spring survey thing you guys know about. Every year we do a survey, we send out questionnaires to as many people as we can. We typically get several thousand responses, and always there's like more than 50% of people, 60, even 65% of people say they're using gRPC.
Wow.
And yet we didn't do anything for them in the Spring framework and the Spring portfolio. So I always said that was a bit of a bit of a gap and
Yeah.
we should do something. But everybody else said, no, we don't have time. We don't have the resources. And they're right. I mean, you have to make these decisions very carefully. And there were some existing, like I said, community projects that were doing the job quite well, as far as we could tell. But then, I don't know, about a year ago, it was obvious that they were falling behind a bit. They weren't really being maintained properly. The people who had started them had moved on and didn't really have time anymore, and it was quite hard. I was contributing to at least one of those projects quite actively, just to keep it moving forwards. Like, for instance, when Spring Boot 3 came out, I sent them some changes to help them to get over that hurdle because they were lagging behind a little bit. And then I think Google, the team at Google who run gRPC kind of outreach, the sort of developer community side of it, they noticed that this was happening, that the community projects were rotting a little bit. And so they took the one that's the biggest one, the one that most people were using, they took it not exactly in-house. They didn't put it in their own mono repo with the rest of gRPC Java, but they put it in a thing called gRPC ecosystem, I think they call it. It's a GitHub organization. So they brought it kind of in-house. They brought it under their wing, shall we say. So they were trying to sort of breathe a bit of life into it. And eventually they came to us and said, look, there's this project that is about Spring, and we've tried to do everything we can to revive it, but nothing seems to be happening. What do you think? And so there were a number of choices. We could do nothing. We could jump in and start maintaining this ecosystem project ourselves. We could just chip away at it like I was doing before, just send PRs occasionally. Or we could do what we actually have done and just take the bull by the horn and re-implement it is basically what we did. So we took all the ideas, the best ideas from the community projects that we could find. There wasn't just this one, there were 2 or 3, and they all had similar approaches but slightly different. And we didn't copy any of the code per se, but you'll see, I think some of the original author tags might still be there because we did borrow heavily, I think, from those projects. They were all Apache licensed, so it wasn't going to be a problem. And we've, added our own sprinkling of, house style, if you like. So the reason we didn't want to maintain the existing project was because it was a little bit idiosyncratic. It's possibly because it was old. I mean, it was, Spring Boot 1.x days, and so it had struggled to keep pace with the evolution of Spring Boot. So we thought rewriting it would be the right option. That's what we did. I don't remember when we started. It was probably this year. I don't know, maybe in the spring, maybe it was March or something like that. No, it wasn't. No, it was last year. Probably September last year, something like that.
Nice.
So we had it in the, how this process works, right? There's a Spring Projects experimental organization in GitHub. So we were in there for a while. I think we got up to 0.7 on that. So we had a 0.1, 0.2, up 7 releases. And then internally, we have this sort of operations meeting where the whole Spring team gets together and kind of votes on things like this. And so I had to take it to that meeting and say, look, I think it's ready to release. Can we do that? And what should we do with it next? And the Spring Boot team said, yeah, we'd like to take that as part of Spring Boot 4. So we need to, that's in November. So we need to start moving forwards. Just like early summer was when this was happening, I guess, in April or May. We needed to start getting stuff ready. So we needed to move it out of the experimental organization into the main Spring Projects organization in GitHub and just tidy it up a bit. I mean, so I think we're going to have a 0.9 definitely, because there were a few kind of, not exactly bugs, but feature requests that we thought needed to be attended to. So we'll have a 0.9. Then probably 1.0 will happen at the same time as Spring Boot 4.0.
Awesome.
First. That's awesome. Great news.
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of part of the headlines new features of Spring Boot 4 as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been talking about what's new with Spring Boot as we head into Spring Boot 4, and that has not been on my list. So I'm going to have to add that to
Now
my
it's
list
on the
as we
list.
go around.
Well, hopefully. I mean, they
talking.
haven't done any of that work yet, but
Yeah.
Chris, if Chris was here, he was planning to join us. I hope he does. He can explain, because he's done this with some other projects. I think he did it with Spring Pulsar.
That's okay. We'll bring him back.
Yeah, basically he's been doing all the spade work to make sure that it'll just slide into Spring Boot as easily as possible, and he's done that before with the boot team. So we're hoping that won't be too difficult.
Cool. One of the things I took out of you explaining that kind of process was the state of Spring survey, folks. Like when we send these out, these are not just like to
we do pay attention.
Yeah, like they're actually listening to what you're saying. So if you get a chance to fill these out, fill them out and be honest. Like what are the things you're interested in? Because obviously we're paying attention to those, and from that Spring gRPC was kind of born. So that's great to hear.
Absolutely. And we always like to take feedback. If you've got questions, you've got feedback, hey, you're taking the milestones for a spin and you would like to share feedback, that's valuable too. We really appreciate that early access, the early feedback that you get. Before we get to GA, all the feedback we can get is definitely valuable.
Yeah, and we're not on GA.
You have to sort of interrogate what you quite mean by GA there. Because it is generally available literally right now. Just to set expectations. It's just we haven't got to 1.0, so we're not guaranteeing API stability yet, and we're also not doing the usual what is it, the open source candidate. There's like a 2-year rolling open source support agreement or something like that.
That's all.
And a commercial going back, however, I can't even remember the details, but it's all on the website. So we're not doing that until we get to 1.0, basically. So we're just saying we'll support whatever's available, whatever's current, and we'll fix any bugs that are there, obviously. But we won't continue to support 0.8 when 1.0 comes out. That's the meaning of 0.0.8. We're not really expecting any API changes either, frankly, at this point, but.
And just because it's not 1.0 doesn't mean you can't take it to production.
You definitely should take it for a spin. Yeah.
And we've been talking with Mark Pollock and Christian on the Spring AI side. Like that wasn't 1.0 forever. We had lots of customers taking that to production.
Snapshots to production.
No, exactly. There are people who will do that, and there are others who are super cautious and who will definitely wait for 1.0, and that's the only way they'll do it. But fair enough.
See that. Okay, so it moved out of experimental. It also got added to the Spring Initializer. So if you want to
Spring Initializer, absolutely. That was one of the first things we did, actually. Moritz Halbert, who is super conveniently helpful with that. And Josh Long wrote the Getting Started guide, and that uses the initializer. So it's it's baked into the documentation even at this point. Awesome. That's very important. It's mainly important actually in this case because like the IDL stuff we were talking about, you need a build time step to convert the IDL into Java code, and you wouldn't expect anybody to remember how to do that. So it's nice to have a starting point for that, so that gets set up in your Gradle or your Maven build.
I don't know if you've seen Josh's demos lately. He does this really amazing he's got a 90-minute session that he does.
He's got the kitchen sink one.
The kitchen sink one, and he even throws in gRPC in
does. Right.
And there's a question here about how do you recommend a simple way of converting Java Pojos into .proto? And I think that's in Josh's Getting Started guide, isn't it?
Sort of. I mean, the way that gRPC is designed to be used, you're supposed to start with .proto, right? You're not supposed to go the other way. But you can. I mean, like manually, obviously, you can just look at all the properties and fields have names and types, and that's basically the same in Java and in Proto. So they're quite easy to map one to the other. But you do at some point need to have the Proto files, at least the way that the whole thing is designed at the minute. I think Josh was complaining he wanted to get his demo down to 89 minutes. So he wanted to avoid writing a proto file, so he raised an issue in the bug tracker in GitHub saying, "Please, can I do this without the proto files?"
Yeah,
but I think you can, right? I mean, there's no reason why not. It's just that that's not the way that other people use gRPC, so it won't be the most obvious way for people to migrate if they're using gRPC already, or if they're using protobuf. It might be an interesting story for people who are not, right? If you're just doing REST.
Right, I'm looking to squeeze something out of an existing.
Yeah. So as another thing that people have asked about, and there's an issue in the tracker, can we run gRPC on the same port as Webflux? Seems like a reasonable question, right? I mean, you're running a Webflux server anyway, and it's running on Netty. You'd think that it would be able to serve gRPC. They don't make it easy, actually, in the gRPC Java project, so we haven't implemented that yet. You can do it with Tomcat. You can do it with a servlet that they provide in gRPC Java. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's some side projects I'm working on will probably eventually lead to you being able to do that, but that won't be part of 1.0, I don't think.
Yeah, you know, I go around and talk about GraphQL a lot too, and I get a lot of the same questions, like how do I just turn all my Java objects into a GraphQL schema? And Spring for GraphQL pretty much takes a schema first approach in a similar manner. It's like not everything is going to be a one-to-one mapping, and so you really want to start with that like schema, that protobuf like first, and figure out, define that contract there. It's not always going to be a just dump everything into the contract, right?
Not always, nearly always though. But so I mean, like there are Java APIs in the Google gRPC libraries that you can use to go from Java to protobuf. Right? You can go that way.
And I'm sure we could use
our APIs that support it, so we can definitely do that. I've looked at it. Like I said, I've been prototyping a few things.
I'm sure we could use our robot friends to do that these days too.
I wouldn't count on it. You probably don't want to get me started on that. We'll have another session on that another day.
All right, sounds good.
That's interesting. I did a quick look on the whole Webflux and gRPC, and in my head I was thinking Jersey project had this really cool way of like, hey, we have all these different API backends, these different ways that you can request information, whether you wanted REST or gRPC or Webflux or whatever it was. You're basically just passing in headers, and you get a different implementation returned. And I was assuming that there'd be something like that, and then a quick Google, I realized that there's tons of people that are asking for Webflux and gRPC, and there's a handful of examples of how they've accomplished it. Yeah, I never thought that would be such a popular topic. So yeah, well done.
I think it might be a little bit of a distinguishing feature of Spring gRPC if we do that eventually. But yeah, we'll see.
So we had to start that Spring.io. We can pick Spring gRPC. We've talked about some of the advantages of gRPC. What does Spring gRPC bring to the table once we kind of do that? You said it gives us some of those boot things out of the box, right?
Some of it's basically comfort, lifestyle choices from the Spring Boot side. It helps you with the dependency management, so I don't have to know which version of Google gRPC to choose. I just do the Spring thing. I don't have to think about so I can write configuration properties, YAML application.yaml application.properties, and configure my gRPC servers and clients. So those are the sort of Spring Boot things, and auto configuration obviously just kind of switches things on and off depending on some properties or some class path dependency, that kind of thing. So for instance, What's a good example? Well, there's a standard gRPC service that is shipped from the Google libraries called service reflection. So if you want to ask a gRPC server for its protobufs, right, for its schema, then you can do that as long as it exposes this reflection endpoint. So that's optional. But if you include it, the relevant jar file on your class path, then Spring gRPC will just stand it up for you. That's the kind of
Nice.
Quality of life feature that we're talking about. We've added some new things compared to the community projects. So we, for instance, on the security side, we have pretty good coverage of Spring Security, including OAuth 2. I don't think OAuth 2 is incredibly commonly used for gRPC, but there are some examples in the Google code base. They don't actually provide implementations, but they do provide hints that it should be possible. So we took that as a hint, and since we have OAuth 2 in Spring Boot already, it was relatively straightforward to just sort of turn that around and put it into the gRPC service. So we've got security. What else is kind of unique about us?
There's nothing about gRPC that says, "Hey, don't use OAuth 2."
No, exactly. They don't say there's no particular reason to use any security. It's just HTTP2. So any security layer you can put on top of that. Therefore, it makes sense basically to use anything that Spring Security already has. I mean, I think a really good story there is the Tomcat one, right? So you can run the gRPC servlet inside Tomcat or your standard servlet container, and then the whole of Spring Security is exactly as you'd been used to it in your everyday Tomcat projects, right? So that's a really nice way to get started with security.
I'm going to jump.
I think the most common, the only thing that they provide out the box in the Java libraries from Google is mutual TLS, right? So server client certificates, which is also something that Spring Security can do. But that since they provide that out of the box, the implementation we use in Spring gRPC is the one that's from Google. If you say that you want to secure, if you want the certificates, actually there's an interesting quality of life thing there, which is Spring Boot has the concept of an SSL bundle.
Yes.
And they use that to configure SSL for databases, for HTTP servers, for message brokers, whatever. It's the same infrastructure, so we use that as well. Which was something that the community projects hadn't done, I think, just because they started before Spring Boot had that feature. So we just knew that it was the most convenient way to do SSL configuration for a Spring Boot app. So that's something that that should work, I think. Yeah. So the recommended way to use gRPC is with transport layer security always, but of course you can always switch it off. So we have in Spring gRPC, we have configuration properties that say relax the TLS, don't use it, or use an insecure client, i.e. don't bother checking the root certificate, that kind of thing. But those are optional. They're not on by default.
So how does integration with Spring Security work? Like, we write these protobufs. Where are we kind of saying Spring Security? Like, can you define like roles and things like that? Or you just write a configuration file that says
you can always. You've got two choices. You can. It's a bit like with REST APIs. In fact, you can either put your @secure annotations on the service layer.
Okay.
Or you can write your security configuration for the endpoint and say these endpoints, these services are protected by this role. all
Cool.
that. It's the same model. You could do either, or you could do both, in fact, because the
Gotcha.
same exception gets bubbled up and
Cool.
and
So
handled by
then we
the
have access to like the
interceptor.
authenticated principal and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's the same
Cool.
same basic model. I mean, it's I guess slightly different because the way the code generator works, so he takes the proto definitions, and turns them into Java, and what you get for your service in that case is a base class, an abstract base class. You just have to implement the business methods, the RPC methods, but you can't change their signature, right? So you can't do fancy things like we do in Spring MVC and Spring Webflux, where you can add another argument to the RPC function and it magically turns it into an authority or something like that. That doesn't work, but that's because the code is generated. That would work if we were going that other direction I was talking about, where we were, embedding in a Webflux app. So the only way we could do that at the minute is to just write a REST controller, basically a handler function, essentially, that would transform POJOs into protobufs and vice versa. So in that case, it would just have all the features of a normal REST controller, including all the Spring Security ones.
Well, that's good to know. Everything that we already know kind of transfers over. So
yeah. I mean, that in the fullness of time in that case, but
okay.
At least most of what you know will transfer directly
Most
right
of what
now.
you know. Yep.
Yeah.
I got a question earlier, and I thought I'd bring it up. Also, how to get micrometer Prometheus metrics to work with gRPC. Currently, this works really good with REST. So for folks who don't know, we kind of redefined the observability story starting in Spring Boot 3.0, and that's kind of fanned out to kind of all of the projects. So is there observability support with Spring gRPC?
Yeah, but it's kind of trivial. It just comes from Micrometer. So Micrometer already had gRPC support. So all we do in Spring gRPC is just auto-configure the Micrometer pieces that were already there.
Nice. So that means if we go ahead and include the actuator and we are making remote procedure calls, we're collecting metrics on this stuff. We can
it should be almost completely transparent. So it's like any REST application. If you include the Micrometer and the Prometheus dependencies, or if you include Micrometer and Hotel, or whatever combination works for you, then Spring Boot will figure out how to configure everything.
I think this has been one of the unsung heroes of Spring Boot from 3.0 on. Like the 3.0 rewrite was big, but then every little release, we've kind of gotten more observability enhancements on there, and it just doesn't seem to be stopping. And people don't realize how much they need it until they're in production and they're trying to figure out what's going on.
Right. Well, I mean, big shout out to the Micrometer team for that, Tommy.
Absolutely.
Because they quietly just added that without anybody necessarily asking for it.
Yeah,
it's not very much code in Micrometer either. I mean, it's quite a simple thing to do. So it's a good example of I don't know, mechanical sympathy or something between Spring projects. They all just fit together quite nicely.
What kind of things does gRPC open us up to? What are the real big exciting things? Hey, you should grab gRPC because it opens the door to this. What do you put on that list?
I don't know, without repeating what I've already said about the polyglot thing, I suppose.
Probably the best one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've been through the reasons that people use gRPC. That's what they are.
Got it. I followed one of your Tinker Horse projects, your Keta Gateway.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Really excited.
Well, I guess that's another reason to do it, is because there are existing ecosystems where gRPC is
was the barrier to entry. Yeah,
it's part of the ecosystem already, so you can fit in with it. yeah, so there's quite a few Kubernetes controllers which have got gRPC sympathies. Yeah.
Yeah, and we, in my role, in Dan's role, like we saw customers like, oh yeah, we wish Spring had gRPC support. We want to use that, but we chose to go another path because of the missing gRPC. So from where I sit, this opened the door to a lot of really amazing opportunities. Like it gets to bring people back into the fold and be in that comfortable place that they all know and love. So this is a big deal. And
I hope that story will change now. It was always quite difficult to find people who would actually demand that we do it there. I mean, like I had one conversation with Ray Tang years ago when he was working at Google, which was quite a long time ago now. But there haven't been very many people actually jumping up and down saying that they really want it. So, I mean, it's good to hear that you've experienced it.
Yeah, and experienced it, and also got to hear like the high fives and got to take a lot of your credit for, oh yeah, we totally did that just for you. I get to, be at the front lines and share that experience because it does bring back a lot of our developers, a lot of our community. It brings them back into the fold where they have less friction to get changes,
which is what it's all about, right? It's like, I mean, it's like any Spring project. It's very thin, Spring gRPC. There's not really very much to it because Spring is Spring and gRPC is gRPC, and they're all quite mature and well developed and quite deep on their own. There's just a tiny little interface in between them, and that's what Spring gRPC is. It hasn't really taken me full time. It's not a full-time job writing and maintaining this library even.
This is the nice thing about being a member of the Spring community is that the Spring team kind of takes care. They're watching, they're paying attention as new protocols, as new technologies are being developed. There's always somebody that's let's explore,
let's tinker.
Yeah, let's tinker. And that's in my head I put a lot of that on you. Dr. Syer.
I do a lot of it. Yeah. I mean, like I said at the beginning, the difficulty is finding the right spaghetti. You need the stuff that sticks. It's not worth it if people don't get behind it, right? We need to have people using it to make it worthwhile. I think with gRPC, we have a pretty good chance of that because there are so many people who say they already use Spring and gRPC. So
I have a feeling that one's gonna.
Yeah.
Rajiv has a question about what about HTTP3? Like, is HTTP3 and REST, is that going to make gRPC irrelevant?
Well, I mean, it's not the same, right? There's a schema-driven, schema-oriented RPC is not the same as what anybody calls REST. I mean, REST is kind of means different things to different people, but it probably doesn't mean schema-driven RPC.
And you still don't have the bidirectional streaming.
Bidirectional streaming is kind of important, although you could argue that with Webflux you can kind of do that anyway.
I got a question. So I was just thinking about, getting started with this, start.spring.io, you could pick Spring gRPC. What if I have like an existing REST API that I started thinking about and I was like, oh, this is a good candidate to move over to gRPC. Is this something like I can migrate like an API at a time, or is this really like I have to replace the whole layer?
I think so, because I mean, anecdotally, I've heard people say that they do that. In fact, Chris just added a feature to the 0.9 release, which is the gRPC Java libraries themselves already had in-process transport. So instead of having remote procedure calls, you're actually doing it locally. And it said on the in the documentation about that, it said mainly used for testing. So we took that as a hint and put it in the Spring gRPC test.
Nice.
So that was a nice thing to be able to do, that you wouldn't have to start a server if you just wanted to test your endpoints. You could just start clients and servers, and they'd be running like inside
Nice.
the same process. A few people came on the tracker, quite a few, and we had quite an active discussion about this, saying actually we want to have it in production as well. We don't just want to use it for testing. And one of the main use cases was what you just said, right? Is taking an existing REST API and migrating it bit by bit.
Yep.
So some of it can be running in process, and
That's pretty cool.
And some of it can be exposed to the outside world, and so you can sort of test your. And you can also another thing you can do as a migration process is to split things apart, right? So you can have your client and your server in the same process to start with, and then just immediately separate them and switch on the HTTP transport instead of the local transport, and it should
That's
work
nice.
identically. I mean, it's we know the fallacies of network.
Yeah.
Network, it almost seems like, I mean, gRPC is the spec is constrained in ways that may take the pain out of those networking fallacies, basically. So that's the idea behind it, at least, anyway.
We often get questions on, so does this new technology make other technology irrelevant? And should we migrate all of our stuff over to new technology? And there's trade-offs, but in our position, me, Dan, Josh, Cora, Cote, we deal with a lot of enterprises, right?
Yeah.
On the globe. And our enterprise customers, a lot of times they're having conversations about, how do I squeeze another 50 milliseconds out of these APIs? And in my head, I honestly never put this into the bucket of options. But I think now we've got another option for, I'm trying to squeeze more throughput, more efficiency, reduce latency out of, massive stock trading. If every transaction we make, right? If we make more
it's worth a
transactions,
try at least anyway, isn't it? Especially if you can do it around the edges. Yeah, I mean, it's different technology.
It's different technology, but it's an option,
and it's especially the gRPC Java server and client implementations are very focused on the gRPC protocol, right? So they're not multi-purpose HTTP servers at all, server and client. It's not like Webflux and the REST template. Right. It's very, very single-purpose, single-mindedly gRPC focused. So that, I think, is the reason why it will probably be better to use that than Webflux eventually anyway, but it's nice to have the option.
Yeah, and you mentioned our friends at Netflix. I mean, you could still have like a public REST GraphQL API that is taking lots of throughput and then spanning off, and now it has to make a call to 12 different services to do all of those things. That when you're doing that many hops through that many services, then that performance and that speed really matters, right? So having that performance internally might be a big thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time imagining how it makes that much of a difference just using a binary protocol, but people say it does, so I guess I have to believe them. I mean, it really is just a different serialization, right? I mean, you get data coming over the wire, you flip a different switch, and it turns those bytes into something, business objects. I can't see how it can be orders of magnitude better, but it might give you the edge, like you just said. I mean, if you might just need that extra 50 or 100 milliseconds.
Yeah,
but I mean, you start
right. How much data we send over the wire?
Yeah, and as DaShaun said, it maybe it's not that one little lever, but it's a combination of levers, right? Like you get a little performance there. Yeah. You upgrade to JDK 24 or 25 from like 11 or 17. Like these little things start to add up.
JDK 25 is going to be big for
Can I ask a personal question?
Yeah.
Are you what version of Java are you using, Dr. Syer?
Am I using? Well, I have used 25. I mean, but it's not even released yet, is it?
Early access. We've got
early access. Yeah, no, I tried it. I
Like-
tried it because of those virtual thread things, right? So
Yep.
it's like a go faster switch for Spring Boot applications. It's pretty amazing.
Your,
I mean,
your
this is
keyword
independent
there,
of gRPC. There's nothing to do with it. But
your keyword just popped up a question. It says from Drew here, what work is being done to auto-configure gRPC Java thread pools with virtual threads? Obviously, IO will remain netty, but will Spring gRPC start to configure executor, offload executor for us?
I don't know. I hadn't actually thought of that.
See?
Yeah, probably that's a good idea because that's the one big drawback with the Google gRPC Java netty server. I said it's very focused on the gRPC protocol, but it's also very thread pool based. It's kind of saturated with things that you have to configure with thread pools. Yeah, we should play around with that for sure, because I think virtual threads will probably make a big difference there.
That'd be awesome.
Great question, Drew.
Yeah, great question. Raise an issue in GitHub. That's definitely something that we should do.
That's your action item, Drew. You've got an action item. Raise that issue.
Well done. If you're going to come to Spring Office Hours, be prepared to listen and maybe be prepared to work. We need an issue.
Dr. Syer doesn't remember this, but it was I think was Spring Boot 2.6 release when the Maven Spring Boot build image plugin. Maybe it's 2.5. And I don't know who you were doing the interview with, but I called in, or I sent him a message like, hey, can I do this on ARM64? And you gave me the guidance, like, well, yeah, if you did this, you did this. And I took and I ran with it. And that's how I started my early versions of the ARM64 build pack.
Oh, yeah, which everybody loves.
Yep. Drew's question, though, reminds me, Drew, I'm just looking at you. It was a setting just like this. And I think you might have opened the door to something really special.
Yeah.
Don't drop the ball.
Awesome.
I mean, there's a class of applications for which virtual threads makes a huge difference, right?
Yes.
And that is definitely going to be part of gRPC.
And whenever I get to talk to people about like, hey, what's new in Spring, what's new in Java, like what are some of your favorite things? I always go back to like JDK 21 and virtual threads, and then the support that came back in Spring Boot 3.2. It's been huge, like for our customers, for developers. Like it has got me so excited about Java probably since like JDK 8 has been like one of the biggest features out there. So, and as you said, this continues to evolve. Like just in JDK 24, we got some new features around like synchronization and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
we still have 2 JEPs out there on
removed a few roadblocks, didn't it? And I hear that Java 25 is just going to go faster because they've got better at I/O or something. I don't know exactly what the switch was, but Doug Lee did it, so it must be something clever.
Love to hear that. All right, we're getting up against it here. So looking forward, as you said, we are currently on 0.8.0. We're marching towards 0.9 and hopefully a 1.0 around November, which will be
November. Yeah, I mean, we might even have a 0.10. Who knows? If anybody finds a bug or something, then we'll do that.
Cool.
And then 1.0 in November. That's right. It's part of Spring Boot.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to that, and I definitely want to get out there and like put a couple demos together, because this again has been on my list for a while. But before Spring gRPC, there's a lot of moving parts to kind of configure this. And as you said, it just does the Spring Boot things. Like, get me started, and don't let me like worry about all this configuration and infrastructure stuff, and let me just start playing with it. So
hopefully it'll be easy, because you're familiar with doing it in the Spring Boot way. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Dave, I will get some things added to the show notes for like the Spring gRPC project. If people want to get a hold of you, is there a way to do so, or do you just kind of hide out from people?
I try to keep a low profile. No, I deleted my Twitter account.
All right.
GitHub's the best place to find me. I mean, I
cool.
actually have a public email address on GitHub. I do respond to people.
Cool. Well, I'll add that GitHub link to the show
I'm
notes
also on Blue Sky.
and Blue Sky.
bluesky.com.
All right. I will add that there as well. Dave, just want to say thank you for taking some time out of your day. Really appreciate it. And we're excited about this project. Can't wait to see what we can do with it and where it's going in Spring Boot 4. So
Great,
thank you very
thanks.
much.
And big shout out to Chris Bono as well. He couldn't be here, but he's
get
done
him.
a lot of the work.
We'll find him. We'll track him down.
Get him on the show.
You guys can't run from us. DaShaun and I will find you.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you
Bye.
next week.